Book 5 Chapter 64. So, these last few days, the dollhouse, the speakeasy, carousel family video with the weird guy dressed like you, all of that was to get you to walk into the flea market and hear two NPCs arguing over a painting? Isaac asked. We were on the roof, just relaxing. Isaac was being his cynical, skeptical self, never missing an opportunity to criticize the way Carousel worked. After we returned with the Omen, he chattered incessantly about the whole mini-quest to find which storyline Logan and Avery were locked behind. Frankly, I didn't know if he was doing it because he was actually confused or if he just liked criticizing the powers that be. Basically, yeah, I said. The clue was about the bowlers, and we know the bowlers have cleared every storyline within spitting distance of the bowling alley. We just had to look around. Once we knew where to look, we were in the home stretch. It's weird, is all, Isaac said. How strange, the guy who is always skeptical is skeptical about this too, Ant-Man said. I'm just saying, I don't like playing ball with Carousel. Doesn't it feel weird that it sets you on some scavenger hunt, and you just did what it wanted? It's training you, don't you get it? You don't really think that guy trying to sell the painting just happened to be there when you were there. No, he was waiting for you, Isaac said as if he had some gotcha. Carousel is patting you on the head for doing what it wanted. I mean. Yeah. I said. All it wanted us to do was go to a specific place and look around. And you're probably right, that guy selling the painting was probably going to be there any time we showed up, because he was our reward for pulling the thread on this little mini-quest and figuring out where to look. Isaac just shrugged his shoulders. It was true that Carousel's mini-quest didn't lead us directly to the Omen, but it led us to the place where we were supposed to look, and I didn't feel like I could ask for more than that. I mean, a map with an X on it would have been preferable, but that was too much to ask for. We had started out our search by looking in shops hoping to find the Omen for sale, the psychic shop, the pawn shop, heck I even scanned through the omens at the doll shop. Carousel just helped us find the right one. We sat on the roof of Kimberly's loft, just me, Antoine, Andrew, and Kimberly after Isaac left. We had some information to gather that we didn't want the others around for. Kimberly, this is a high-stakes role, and the audience is going to expect a standout performance from you, Sal said over the speakerphone. But I have to say, I can't help but feel that the ending will be taken as really bleak, and it might put the brakes on your career. You think it will be a difficult role for me? Kimberly asked. I think the audience will have a really hard time believing a happy ending. Honestly, it's just asking a lot, he said. He had a serious tone. That wasn't good. We were now doing our customary mixing and matching, testing our tropes against the Omen for straight on. We needed to find the best possible rescue trop and the best team to go with it. Everything was on the line because we no longer had Dinah's very forgiving rescue trop on the table. We wouldn't have used it if we did. Sal and Kimberly exchanged their goodbyes, as he didn't have much more to say. She had equipped her rescue trop, a woman in mourning, which was usually used against serial killers and slashers, human killers who might taunt the loved ones of their past victims. And while the trop technically did work with the new werewolf storyline, all indications were that it was just a terrible fit. It made sense. Creating a visceral thriller where the bad guy has actual supernatural abilities and runs in a pack, while the main character is an isolated, emotionally charged individual, just did not stack up as an easy win. In fact, when she equipped her rescue trop and I used my I don't like it here scouting ability, the difficulty shot up to get to the car now, the highest difficulty I measured for regular stories. The problem was my rescue trop was no different. The wrong reel would have us protecting our base against the werewolves all night long. While this was compatible, it was also far too difficult. My rescue trop, like Kimberly's, was better against mundane or slightly paranormal human enemies. Werewolves were ferocious beasts. Guess that leaves me, Ant-Man said. I could see a look of relief, or pride, maybe, as he said it. He must have sensed the hesitation on my face. What? He asked. There's not going to be a problem here. He quickly equipped his rescue trop, but Kimberly didn't unequip hers. "Maybe we should talk about this," she whispered to Antoine. "Let's just try it out," Antoine said. "Then we can talk once we have the information." Ever since Antoine messed up in the final straw storyline and dissociated on screen for over 10 minutes, Kimberly and I had been worried about what we were going to do when we came across another storyline that involved a forest, an apparent trigger for Antoine's latent trauma. He got close to her, put his hand on her hand, and then whispered, "Let's just try it," in a sweet way that she wasn't going to be able to stand up to. Just as I expected, she unequipped her rescue trop, and with a few taps on her phone screen, another call went out to her agent, Sal. I didn't even need to wait for the phone call. I could see that the difficulty of the omen dropped down. The difficulty level was "This is scaring me," which was more difficult than the base storyline had registered but less difficult than what either mine or Kimberly's rescue trop registered as. That might have been counterintuitive, seeing as his trop, A Race Against Time, turned the storyline into, well, a race against time. It put a timed clock on victory and forced the players to accomplish some feat, usually involving hustle, before time ran out. Why would a rescue like that be easier than mine or Kimberly's? It was actually the same reason that Arthur's advanced archetype of monster hunter had made the grotesque storyline easier, even though, by all accounts, it made the enemy stronger and more violent. The grotesque statue was a powerful enemy in the psychological horror story it was originally supposed to be in. But it was actually a pretty beatable enemy with an exploitable weakness in a head-to-head fight. The same was probably true with the werewolves in Straight On. In both mine and Kimberly's rescue tropes, the enemy was put into a situation where a werewolf would be far too dominant for us to overcome while simultaneously not giving us enough advantages to be able to win. Antoine's rescue trop, however, seemed to give us enough wiggle room that even a mighty foe could be beaten. After all, with A Race Against Time, you just had to accomplish some goal before the time ran out. We didn't have to kill or capture werewolves, as in Kimberly's rescue trop, or survive an onslaught from them all night, as with mine. Of course, what exactly we had to accomplish with Antoine's rescue trop was not clear. As we had seen with Dinah's rescue trop in the storyline, sometimes difficulty or ease just came down to how your rescue trop interacted with the base storyline. It wasn't always clear what would happen. Sometimes, the resulting story might be easier or harder for reasons you could never predict. "Okay, honey, this is a high-paced, action-packed storyline with a nice mystery angle," Sal said. "It has something for everybody, from the ones who just want to turn their brain off and watch a high-paced flick to people who like the backstory and the lore, depending on how the director goes with it. Frankly, I see you on the poster, scared out of your mind, terrifying beasts at your heels. So it'll be a lot of running from werewolves?" Kimberly asked. "Oh, you could expect that," Sal said. "Fair amount of running toward them, too. The secret here is that your character is brave beyond belief, and in fact, if you don't play this right, people won't believe it at all. So you have to just be this character that is ready to re-explore her past at all costs. You know what I mean? Like, she's had it with running, and the fact that there's a lot of money on the table for her is just one of the reasons she's doing it, because money alone probably won't make sense. Interesting notes about her character. What can you tell me about my co-stars?" she asked. "Well, they had better be ready for a fight," Sal said. "Because this one is an ensemble story where everyone has to bring something to the table, or else nobody is gonna see the light of day, you understand?" "I got you," Kimberly said. Sal was beginning to get vague again. That made sense because this was going to be a hard storyline, which meant that he wasn't going to have a lot to say. But he had told us everything we could have hoped to hear. This was a fight where everyone would need to be ready to carry the story, and Kimberly would be quite important to the narrative, which went well with her celebrity aspect. "Anything else?" Kimberly asked. "All I can say, Kimberly, is that every actress needs a werewolf story in her repertoire, and this might be the one for you if you think you can cut it." "I think we can cut it," Kimberly said, looking at Antoine but not with optimism. Perhaps with loyalty, like she could never speak an ill word. Kimberly hung up the phone. "That sounds better than the last ones," Ant-Man said. "What is your scouting troop saying?" he asked me, but even before I answered, it seemed he knew just by looking at my face. "It's better, isn't it? It's easier with my rescue troop, right?" He had me there. "Yes," I said, "but I only have theories about why that is." "Then it's settled," Ant-Man said. "We go with my rescue troop, max out on hustle and metal, and we go kick some werewolf tail." He looked at me and said, "What? You were hoping that you'd get to leave me behind?" I hated it when people tried to read me. "Come on, Ant-Man, don't be like that. You know exactly why this is a problem. That mountain is covered in forest. The only problem with the final straw," Ant-Man said, "was that I did not bring along my nightmare troop. That was it. Every other time, I have been fine. Stop treating me like a child." "I am not treating you like a child. I'm treating you like someone who lost his sense of reality on screen for long enough that the enemy you were chasing came back and found you and pushed you to the ground to snap you out of it. And if it had been anyone that wasn't Benny, you would have been dead." Ant-Man had no retort, which I hated. I didn't want to argue. I actually thought we were basically on the same page already, however reluctant he was. "Riley," Andrew said, stepping in, "I think what Ant-Man is asking for is for you to respect his judgment of himself and to treat him like someone who is actively improving his condition every day. He has the tools to live with his ailment. If he thinks he can succeed, we should believe him. I think he would say he was fine even if he wasn't. If we go into the storyline, which is probably low to mid-30s in plot armor difficulty, and he freezes up, he doesn't just endanger himself, he endangers all of us. He has the stats and abilities to help us win a storyline like this, and we need him. But if he's compromised, then we need to go out and find other rescue tropes and go about this differently." I really wasn't trying to come across as a jerk. "I knew this whole time that you were gonna be like that," Ant-Man said. He took a deep breath. "Riley, I am struggling. I'm not denying that. But I'm not crazy, and I'm not out of control. I just need a few accommodations, a few mental health tropes, a little bit of understanding. That's what I need. Sitting out on the bench isn't going to be any good for me or the team." I didn't say anything for a while because I knew I wasn't going to win this fight. I even thought that Kimberly agreed with me because she knew Ant-Man's condition better than any of us, but she didn't say anything. "I am treating him," Andrew said, "both with my tropes and with my training in psychology. I can vouch for him. His injury is almost artificial in nature, it's difficult to describe. I believe that if we do our due diligence and treat it seriously, we can prevent any meaningful symptoms in a storyline." "Don't act like I'm some lone dissenter," I said. "We were all in agreement that this was a big deal, and then everyone decided it wasn't a big deal, and nobody told me." "All right, I don't think you're crazy. I just don't know how to plan around that particular problem. But if you say the problem's gone and everything's taken care of, well, then I guess I have nothing to talk about." Andrew may have been telling the truth, and he also may have been playing the odds. He saw that we needed Ant-Man's rescue troop to rescue his teammates, so he may have been putting his thumb on the scale and exaggerating Ant-Man's miraculous regimen to maintain his sanity. I would never know. "Well, I said my piece," I said. "If you're saying that he's gonna be fine, then I'm not going to argue. But what I really meant was that whatever happens in the storyline, I needed to constantly plan around Ant-Man not being 100% reliable. Because while rescuing Logan and Avery, two people I had never met, was not exactly the most important thing on my to-do list, it was still important, and the experience gained from a successful rescue was essential. This was never going to be easy, so why not just throw on another obstacle? I had to hope that Ant-Man could keep faking it just a little bit longer. Luckily, he was just one player, and he wasn't the only fighter we had anymore. They may have been suspicious about why I gave in so quickly. Maybe they thought I was going to throw a tantrum or something, or maybe I was overthinking it. I didn't know. But they started talking excitedly about their plans for the storyline, about how vital the party phase was going to be because finding weapons that worked against werewolves was essential. The only way for us to do that was through exploration in the party phase, or maybe a bit of rebirth. Ideally, we would have found good weapons on our shopping trips, but very few seemed to show up. I found myself staring at the painting, to which we had devoted an entire deck chair so that we could stare at it when we needed to activate our tropes or just feel inspired. Who was the woman in the picture, and what was the significance of the silver necklace? And why didn't Sal mention it? That's when I realized something had changed. Wait a second, I said. The omen changed. They all stopped talking and looked at the painting. What's different? Kimberly asked. Purchasable omens in shops like the pawn shop or the flea market were different from normal omens. Everyone could see details about them, although they were often abbreviated or not very clear. From what I gathered, everyone could see, to some degree, how the storyline was triggered. Originally, you had to put it into the back of a wood panel station wagon in southeastern Carousel to activate the storyline. Their instructions simply told them to return it to its owner, a task which would send them on a long string of clues until they eventually figured out how to put it in the back of the wood panel station wagon. But that trigger had changed because of Antoine's rescue trop. That had not happened with Itch. The trigger was now simply entering Southeast Carousel, I said, and even they knew that. Triggering it became easier, Kimberly said. Is that good or bad? Neither, I said. Or both. It means that the storyline is on a soundstage. Doesn't it? Oh, Andrew said. That does make sense. The original takes place in Carousel proper, but this one is different in some meaningful way. Can't we get Lila to show us around the soundstage using her scouting trop so we're familiar with things? Ant-Man asked. Andrew shook his head. Her scouting trop's not particularly good for that sort of thing. The sound stages are usually barren when she opens them up, no NPCs, no good information. And I'm not sure she could select the specific sound stage even if she wanted to, especially since the omen isn't in that area. It's a purchasable omen. Lila could open up sound stages for the purpose of traveling safely, but as amazing as that ability was, it apparently had some limitations. I didn't know how much this changed things or if it did at all. Either way, we would find out soon. Book 5 Chapter 65. Now that we had decided we were using Antoine's rescue trop, and I say we very loosely, we could bring up some of the other players to join the talk since the subject of Antoine's mental health was no longer on the table. Should we have kept it a secret from them? I had no idea. I was done thinking about it. Cassie was now in one of the lounging chairs, doing her best to focus on a voice. No, she said, voices. I think they're lovers quarreling. Two women. I hear growling. I can't tell what they're saying. How can you tell they're lovers if you can't tell what they're saying? Isaac asked. I'll tell you when you're older, Ant-Man said. One of them is very angry, but now all I hear is roars. I think it's the werewolves. I hear the word curse, Cassie said. One of them is very angry at the other, but it's like I'm hearing them through a wall or something. She was using her eye block trop, which allowed her to eavesdrop on the enemy, so to speak, until they eventually shut her out. So far, we hadn't gotten much content from the trop, but it still held its clues. If we didn't already know this was a werewolf storyline, we could probably guess from the way she was describing it. And the two women arguing were interesting, although I didn't understand the context yet. Suddenly, Cassie let out a blood-curdling scream. One of them noticed me and just screamed in my ear, she said. That's all I got. She was actually physically pressing her hand against her ear. Could her psychic eavesdropping cause her physical pain in her ear? Who knew? That was useless, she said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Ant-Man said. We learned plenty. Like what? Isaac asked. What did we learn? We learned that there is psychic power in the storyline, so these aren't strictly biological werewolves. Their curse is probably magical in nature, I said. If there wasn't any magic, her trop wouldn't have worked at all. And we know that a fight between two women, who Cassie somehow knows are lovers, is somehow important, but it's not clear how. Maybe one of them is Serena, Ramona said, holding up the VHS copy of Stray Dawn, The Mark. The back matter of the VHS talked about an enigmatic and charismatic troublemaker who was most certainly a werewolf. We'll see, I said. Meanwhile, Andrew had his nose buried in the atlas in a section about werewolves. I thought he was wasting his time because, frankly, that section, which described different archetypal enemies, was often lacking. It could never give spoilers, and trying to generalize enemies based on cosmetic similarities seemed dangerous. That wasn't to say there weren't nuggets of good knowledge in that section of the atlas. After all, there were some good rules of thumb about different movie monsters that a lot of players might not be familiar with. It would seem that a weakness to silver is universal, although the potency of silver changes from film to film, Andrew said. Yes. It says that Carousel likes to add a mystery to werewolf stories about the identity of the werewolf if possible, and the person who wrote this note suggests that you really spend a lot of time building up that mystery because it'll take up screen time and take the place of physical altercations. That's a really good insight, I said, genuinely surprised. I had read that section, but it had been a while. So we try to exaggerate the mystery elements so that the big reveal is what's important, and the actual fights get less screen time, and we're less likely to die, right? Ant-Man asked. That's how I took it, I said. There was one resource that Carousel had in limited supply, regardless of its omnipotence, runtime. A storyline, or at least the movie made from it, could only have so many minutes in it. So, if you could fill up that screen time with stuff that won't get you killed but that is interesting to the audience, then there would be less time for all the things that can kill you. It says that one of the first things you have to do, Andrew said, is determine the mindset of these werewolves, whether they are aware of their transformation, whether they're hiding it, or if they have the same mental faculties as a human and as a wolf. This determination, he read, could be the single most important piece of insight in any werewolf story. He continued to read through the hints and would read them out loud when he found one he liked. Look at this, he said. It says that any betrayal trap can act as a blood control trap because in order to betray allies, a player would have an opportunity to be turned into a werewolf, and players should use this to help propel the story forward. That wasn't just true about werewolves. It applied to vampires and zombies as well. Anything that converted you into a monster would work with a betrayal trap to guarantee that that person became a monster, or at least give them the opportunity for it. He continued reading and didn't find any more pieces of advice that he felt were worth reading aloud until he got to the end. It says here that werewolves are really good for pursuing a monster hunter advanced archetype because of the nature of investigating lore, werewolf identity, and eventually hunting down the werewolf. This one mentions a conversation with Arthur C., Andrew said. Arthur. Kimberly repeated. So that's how he did it, how he got his advanced archetype. It would appear so, Andrew said. Of course, this was back before the archetype tracker, so they were just guessing, but it seems they understood the basics. Try to get cast as your desired AA, and then do well in that role. Rinse and repeat. Maybe I'll go for Monster Hunter, Ant-Man said. That probably wouldn't make much sense, Andrew said gently. A Monster Hunter is a savvy-based melee fighter. You're already a metal-based melee fighter. If anything, this would be a downgrade for you. I can put points in savvy if I need to, Ant-Man said. I find the athlete to be too generalized. Yeah, I'm a melee fighter, but I feel like I just get assigned to roles without much bite to them. Security guard, cop, jock. I feel like I'm not living up to my potential. That might change once you get your aspect, I said. I feel like most of my roles ever since I got my aspect have been pretty specific to my skill set. Sport, stud, or health nut, Ant-Man said aloud, leaning back in his deck chair and drinking a beer. What grand opportunities lay before me. The conversation continued but took a much more practical route, as we had to discuss builds and team composition. Luckily, my I don't like it here trap could do a lot of the thinking for us. For instance, Dinah and Bobby appeared to be of little benefit in this storyline. We determined that by seeing if the difficulty went up and down with their presence, but it simply didn't, whether they were on the team or not. I couldn't even feel the difficulty changed at all. Sal did say that this was an ensemble movie, right? Kimberly said. So wallflowers and outsiders don't get a lot of screen time because they are minor archetypes, right? That's more or less it, I said, but that depends on their aspect and tropes. The more meta they were, the less substantial characters they could play, but again, that was true with film buffs, too. Unfortunately, we could never get a measure of how difficult the storyline would be without me, because I was the one taking the measurement. And unless I was included on the team, we would never know how tough it was. Of course, I could have given my drop to one of them to use, but I didn't mention that. Well, that means we don't need Lila either, Michael said. He had kept quiet for most of this, but I could see him over there doing push-ups and sit-ups as he mentally prepared for the fight ahead. Lila, who had also not been talking much, was finally roused out of silence by that comment. I have to go, she said. I have to make it up to them. If you take me, I'll be one of the blood sacrifices. I can guarantee my death, or at least it'll look like it, she said. She did have a drop that allowed her to trigger her own off-screen death, similar to mine, although it took her less work because all she had to do was let out a blood-curdling scream. I, on the other hand, had to come up with some convoluted scenario where it looked like I died but didn't. To be honest, that was a very strong offer. Even if she did nothing else, taking first or second blood for the rest of us was a huge benefit. Kimberly, feeling a sense of duty or something like that, said, well, that means I can be first blood. My looks don't last trop guarantees it. Normally, I would be on board, but this wasn't a normal circumstance. The thing is, you're a celebrity, I said. Keeping the story revolving around you with your Hall of Fame aspect drop could be really useful to us. And looks don't last doesn't guarantee your death, it guarantees that you suffer the fate of that particular storyline, which in this case might mean turning into a werewolf. And if you're a werewolf combined with being a narrative-hugging celebrity, it might make you a pretty strong werewolf, depending on how those two things play together. Lila's drop guaranteed that she would get the dead status, which meant she would not turn into a werewolf. It was a huge benefit. So, what are we talking? Lila as first blood? Andrew asked. That would be hard to guarantee, I said. Unlike looks don't last, her drop dying last scream did not guarantee that she would be first or second blood. It just guaranteed that she would get the dead status when she let out a blood-curdling scream while being attacked. What if she had a little bad luck? Ant-Man asked. Well, there's a thought, I said. Now where could we get some bad luck? Bad luck? Andrew asked. Ant-Man reached into his pocket and pulled out his bad luck magnet drop. He had been awarded this in the middle of the campfire storyline in order to guarantee he was attacked and to ensure he could not run from it. It would give the rest of us a lot of invisible bonuses on everything we tried as long as she lived, but it would guarantee she was targeted first, regardless of anything else. Andrew grabbed the drop from Ant-Man and read over it. Yes, you told me about this, he said. It looks like it could work. Any thoughts? He asked, looking over at me. Well, assuming that there is no enemy drop that allows for early deaths unrelated to first blood and assuming that there is not a scripted first blood, it would likely work, I said. If there is a scripted first blood, that would be even better. Whatever objection Michael or anyone else might have had to allowing Lila to run the storyline evaporated at the prospect of giving her bad luck magnet. In all likelihood, she would die pretty quickly, but if she didn't, she would make us a little bit better at everything we did. It was a win-win. Alright, so Lila comes on as general support and potential blood sacrifice. Ant-Man is in as a fighter and for his rescue drop, I said. Kimberly is in for narrative control. Because she is a celebrity, we can ensure that the story will circle around her in some manner that'll make it predictable for us. What else? Andrew nodded his head. What has me particularly confused is that the story seems to respond so well to high-savvy players. You and I are both high-savvy, he said, talking to me. We won't do very well in a fight, and yet our presence seems to make the story easier. I'm curious as to why that might be." He was right. Whenever he left, the storyline did get a little harder, but I had chalked that up as just the benefit of having a healer. But it was true, the team did have a lot of savvy, and it wasn't clear why that was beneficial from anything we were told. Until I thought about it for a moment. "Well, werewolves go hand in hand with monster hunters, right?" I said. "And monster hunters are savvy-based. So, is it possible that the storyline benefits from savvy because werewolves have to be researched and have to be hunted, which are things that savvy is good for?" Now, we were onto something. "So we have a doctor and a film buff covering it from both the lore and meta perspective," Andrew said. "And I must say that, in addition to being Logan and Avery's teammate, Michael also has many tropes that could be useful for fighting werewolves." He certainly did. His ability to know the terrain alone would be priceless. "Hell yeah, I do," Michael said. "So that's it," I said. "A soldier, a doctor, an athlete, a celebrity, a blood sacrifice, and a guy who watches too many movies. Sounds like a team to me," Ant-Man said. There was a nervous excitement in the air as we all talked about what tropes we were going to bring. We let Ant-Man talk about how well we were going to do and give us a pep talk. But the truth was, we were at a big disadvantage. It was true that the storyline was not as hard as Post-Traumatic, the storyline that Anna and Camden were trapped in, but it was a difficult storyline, and we were not going to have an easy time. Even though Ant-Man's rescue trop also had that same little safety net that Dinah's had, where if you weren't killed in the storyline, you would survive it even if you failed, this one would be different because, unlike in Dinah's trop, we would not be background characters or non-existent characters. We would be the focus, and I had a hard time believing that too many of us were going to survive if we failed, regardless of a safety net. More than that, I believed we had to throw away the safety net in our minds because our goal wasn't to struggle through and grind out levels over the decades. Our goal was to beat this in one shot and gain enough experience to beat the game at Carousel before we died of old age. I knew that the smart thing to do was to abandon our hope of this rescue for a time, go out, train, gather more experience, and level up until this rescue would be easier. But to do that would take months, and it would defeat the purpose of having all these rescues available to us. We couldn't be safe. We had to be exceptional. The goal was to reach a high level with the fewest storylines possible. That way, we could maximize experience without building up too many residual spoilers. And we were going to succeed at that because I had no intention of letting my friends rot in Carousel for the rest of their lives. I wanted to bring Dinah along, or maybe even Bobby. According to my difficulty rating abilities, they might not help that much innately, but having them around to level up would be great. Unfortunately, having them stay behind might have been more critical. After we had planned out a run of Stray Dawn, Antoine, Kimberly, and I got Bobby and Dinah together and we went over the plan. "We need you to stay behind with Isaac, Ramona, and Cassie," I said. "As much help as I would think you might be on the storyline, we need you to stay behind in case we fail." Dinah seemed to have already gathered that. "I'll have to get my rescue trop back," Dinah said, "but that shouldn't take more than a few months, and it'll take a long time to be able to rescue you." "We've been thinking about that," I said. "We think what you need to do is find other storylines where you can be awarded rescue tropes, storylines that have innate rescues built into them. That's where you have to go. Get as many rescue tropes as you can find and find one that works really well to come to save us. I think that's your best method of attack," I said. "I suspect that the rescue tropes we have right now are not perfect, but they're good enough. When you come to rescue us, you need one that's perfect." I handed them a list of storylines we had found that had a high probability of rewarding rescue tropes. "Of course, you'll also keep the Atlas. You really thought this out, didn't you?" Dinah said. "I knew you've been looking into this, but I didn't think you were this far. All I get to do is plan. That's my whole job," I said. "And about going to Bobby's place, you'll probably want to go directly there when we leave." On second thought, just in case. If the writ of habitation suddenly stops working while you're asleep one night, well, you'll probably be hit by an omen really quickly. Perhaps I was being a little too nonchalant about all of this, but they were taking it in pretty heavily. They let me explain it and seemed to take it well enough, heaviness aside. One thing, Bobby said. Before you go on that storyline, I want to see the grotesque. Of course, he did. I'll show it to you, I said, but I'm telling you, she's only in one scene and barely, she's mostly just referred to. I want to see it, he said. I'm sure of it. Who was I to deny that request, the last glimpse of his wife he might ever see, and it was a background shot of her standing outside of a home while the rest of us did our jobs and played our characters. And then she was gone, but we watched the whole movie through, and Bobby was closely attentive, watching everything. She wasn't even in it enough to trigger heavy breathing. There was no hint of the ex-murderer. I thought he would be angry and demand more, but Bobby wasn't the type to get angry. He was the type to get sad. Sad but resolute. I'll find her if it's the last thing I do, he said through tears, no matter what. I hoped he would find answers, though I had no idea what those answers would be. Now, all that was left was to throw our chips in against Carousel's terrible beasties and see if we lived to see the dawn. Book 5 Chapter 66 Riley Lawrence is the film buff. His aspect is filmmaker. Filmmaker. The filmmaker has a comprehensive understanding of the filmmaking process. They can manipulate the game environment effectively, altering the game's dynamics in subtle but impactful ways. Their abilities are a mixture of meta-insight and meta-rule tropes. They have higher hustle, reflecting their ability to stay out of the way, stay alive, and remain on scene as they manipulate meta-movie elements. Riley has a plot armor score of 30, metal of 4, moxie of 7, hustle of 7, savvy of 8, and grit of 4. Free background trop. My grandmother had the gift. A background trop that gives Riley's character some ambiguous connection to the gift through his heritage. Current trop limit, 9. Trop Master grants him the ability to perceive enemy tropes, but at the cost of sacrificing half of his plot armor. As an oblivious bystander, Riley remains untargeted by enemies as he convincingly acts oblivious to their presence. Cutaway death sends him off-screen before the moment of his character's implied demise and allows him to exist behind the scenes written off if he survives the encounter. The dailies allows him to see a selection of raw footage from the day's shoot. Just out of shot allows him to see cameras when sneaking near an enemy to avoid being seen. Quiet on set allows the user to listen to the audio of the current on-screen scene while off-screen, depending on savvy and the information's value. Raised by television buffs the user to do one big meaningful action if they establish their inspiration from film and television to establish it. The insert shot makes allies aware of an object the player chooses. The object will be shown to the audience and its use will be buffed in the finale. Director's Monitor grants the user death watch upon their character's death. Tilda. Kimberly Madison is the eye candy. Her aspect is celebrity. Celebrity. The celebrity aspect treats the player like an actor in the storylines like films they sign on to. Using meta tropes to create hype, fan favoritism, and larger-than-life roles, the celebrity is the most versatile of the eye candy aspects. Using past roles to help their career, the celebrity can specialize in virtually anything if they have long enough to build a career. Kimberly has a plot armor score of 27, metal of 5, moxie of 10, hustle of 5, savvy of 1, and grit of 6. Current trop limit, 9. Convenient backstory allows her to believably change her backstory to assist with the current task, buffing the relevant stat. Does anyone have a scrunchie? Allows her to shift Moxie's points into another stat by putting her hair up. The penthouse. The character will get the nicest, safest accommodations in a multi-day storyline. The Hall of Fame. The user gains center of attention and will have a heightened role in the story regardless of casting. Meta-story elements are more central. Get a room. Boosts the odds of important discoveries when exploring with a love interest during the party. When in Rome, buffs her grit until rebirth if her performance matches the tone of the movie. Social awareness allows her to see the moxie stat of all enemies and NPCs and intuit relationship dynamics. Contract negotiations. The user will get a buff to an improvisation after discussing an improvisation with Carousel. Breaking the veil of silence. The user will get warnings from knowledgeable NPCs. Outside of storylines, NPCs will warn of dangers to women and hint at storyline rewards. Antoine Stone is the athlete. No aspect has been chosen. Antoine has a plot armor score of 27, metal of 8, moxie of 4, hustle of 5, savvy of 3, and grit of 7. Current drop limit, 9. Jim Rat buffs metal and hustle by revealing athletic backstory. Brandishing a weapon is like a security blanket, buffing his grit and soothing his and his allies' fear. Everyone loves a winner. The user's character will have some previous success that endears them to NPCs. Failure reverses this. Stronger Together buffs mental health and healing when the user and allies are together in a group. A race against time creates a rescue with a timed clock that must be beaten. You were having a nightmare. Reduces traumatic memories to nothing but a lingering dream and can undo much of a storyline at a very high level. Knight in Shining Armor buffs metal and grit when defending a romantic interest. The playbook. The user would be able to see when it is their turn to act in an established plan. Better Make It Count greatly buffs the last round of ammunition the player has available in a fight. Dr. Andrew uses the Doctor. No aspect has been chosen. Andrew has a plot armor score of 28, metal of 1, moxie of 5, hustle of 8, savvy of 9, and grit of 5. Current drop limit, 9. Step into my office. Sanctuary is granted while treating allies in a private scene, safeguarding all until treatment is complete based on the user's savvy. The Oath. By referencing their personal healer's oath, the user's grit is buffed while treating a wounded ally. Observational analysis. Observing characters before critical scenes lets the user discern their fixed personality traits, making it easier to predict their reactions if provoked. Let it out. During mental trauma treatment, the patient reveals deep-seated feelings, aiding in their mental recovery but risking emotional breakdowns. Professional courtesy. Characters and related professions recognize the user's professional status, offering them helpful insights and special access. Absolute focus. The user's hustle is enhanced when performing tasks requiring dexterity and precision, thanks to their meticulous focus. Critical anatomy. Studying a creature reveals weak spots, increasing the user's metal when targeting these vulnerabilities. The slab. Performing a post-mortem on a corpse yields increasing information over time, with a countdown until the scene's end. Study session. If the user has the highest savvy, they designate a stacks research location where allies are safe during certain scenes and can access valuable knowledge. Michael Brooks is the soldier. No aspect has been chosen. Michael has a plot armor score of 26, metal of 8, moxie of 2, hustle of 6, savvy of 3, and grit of 7. Free background trop. Born and raised. A background trop that makes it so he is a local to the setting and is familiar with it, granting several equipable tropes. Current trop limit, 9. Back of my hand. Familiarity with the setting allows the user to navigate known locations easily, with a map of key areas available. Live off the land. The user knows where to find food, water, and shelter in the wild and can locate ingredients for rituals or spells if appropriate. Knife rush. Rushing an enemy who has a bladed weapon gives the user a brief window of invulnerability, thanks to their hustle. Nighty night. A stealthy strike on an unaware target renders them unconscious, provided their plot armor is weak enough and their character wouldn't go for the kill. Half a world away. Demonstrating yearning for a distant lover bolsters the user's grit. Sold a lie. The user can detect deceptions too good to be true and sense manipulators, even if the details are unclear. Basic training. The lowest of the user's metal, hustle, and grit stats receive a slight buff and the user may equip standard issue soldier gear when relevant. You're wasting your bullets. Upon hitting an enemy without damaging them, the user gains insight into the enemy's defenses. Conservation of lead. Ammo automatically adjusts to match the user's current firearm, converting based on weight. Lila White is the wallflower. No aspect has been chosen. Lila has a plot armor score of 23, metal of 1, moxie of 3, hustle of 10, savvy of 4, and grit of 5. Current trop limit, 8. Bad luck magnet. All rolls will fail, and the user will be targeted. Allies will have the opposite happen. Borrowed from Ant 1, a hopeless plea. Begging for release forces the captor to verbally deny it. If they don't, persuasion might succeed. A scream in the distance. A loud scream sends the user off screen, allowing an ally who hears it to appear on screen. There's been a murder. Discovering a gruesome scene lets the user scream, initiating an investigative scene with applicable characters. Not important enough. Staying out of plot-critical actions keeps the user safe from intelligent enemies until the midpoint, where they are written off. Grants limited access to the script. Dying last scream. A realistic death scream sends the user off screen, allowing enemies to ignore them while gaining deathwatch and the dead status. The killer's wake. Playing dead during a massacre allows the user to escape safely after the scene and provides knowledge of the complete script for that scene. A cry in the dark. A cry during peril alerts nearby allies to the user's location and status. Tilde. Tilde tilde. The omen trigger for Stray Done was simply to bring the painting to southeastern Carousel. It meant exactly that. Because while we left in a group and walked in a group, as soon as we crossed the invisible barrier between central Carousel and southeastern Carousel, I found myself instantly transported into the driver's seat of a 1981 Comstock Overlander, careening down the highway at 60 miles an hour. The shock and surprise of it all almost sent me off the road into a tree. Luckily, I wasn't on screen because I cussed from sheer surprise and slammed on the brakes, leaving my car, a very long, four-door vehicle that reminded me of a Crown Victoria, spread out on the narrow road, covering both lanes. My heart raced as I put two and two together and realized what had happened. Then, I got distracted by something else. Carousel took my hoodie again. That was the first thing I noticed, and I didn't quite mind. Instead of some generic jacket, it gave me a classy trench coat, like some war detective. I looked around the car and saw that a folder of papers had been scattered all over the passenger seat floor from my harsh braking. This little jump scare had stirred up a great deal of anxiety in me. All I could do was take a deep breath and send out a silent prayer to the universe that we'd succeed on our first shot. We had run it so many times that I worried it had rewired my brain to believe that these storylines were somewhat safe. But all of my instincts told me this one would be difficult. We had prepped as well as we could, but at the end of the day, werewolves were icons for a reason. It would be a struggle. I reached down, gathered up the scattered papers, and noticed that one of the most prominent of them was a map. Thankfully, someone had traced out my route, even marking where I was supposed to stop and where to go afterward. They even did it in my own handwriting. How thoughtful. We were still at the very beginning of the party phase, and it didn't look like the needle on the plot cycle was moving at all. I took another deep breath, letting my heart rate settle, then eased off the brake and corrected my course, heading straight down the road. I was alone. That meant Kimberly, Ant 1, Andrew, Lila, and Michael were somewhere out there, hopefully gathering all the information we needed to understand how these werewolves worked and what we were supposed to do to survive. All we knew for sure about the plot was that there would be a ticking clock. With werewolves, the ticking clock usually revolved around the full moon. For some reason, that bit of information didn't make me feel any safer. I started about 15 miles out of town, and as I looked at the map, I realized that, geographically, nothing made sense. Based on my estimation, all of the wooded areas beside the road should have been houses and buildings within Carousel proper. But we weren't in Carousel proper. We were on a soundstage. I hoped to figure out what was so special about this version of Stray Done that it needed its own dedicated soundstage. That and a million other things could be the clue we needed to survive, and it was my job to find it. It could also be useless trivia. As I followed the map and road, I quickly realized that this miniature version of Carousel, with one post office and a few restaurants, was surrounded by forests with names like Big Root State Park or High Mountain Reservation. We were in the wilderness. I shuddered to think what that might do to Antoine's trauma, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. It wasn't productive. We were in the thick of it. It was time to stay sharp and trust my team. The drive into town was uneventful, though I did encounter some traffic. There was a car in front of me, a station wagon, though not the wood panel model described by the Omen. This one had a canoe on top. As I drove along, I noticed more cars with hints of motorsports and outdoor activities, jet skis being hauled, fishing poles packed up. Before long, I found myself approaching a sign that read, "Welcome to Carousel. Population, 1,532. It was so small that it didn't even use the entirety of southeastern Carousel as a setting. Though I had eaten before we left, I was suddenly very hungry. I realized this just as I was about to pass a diner, a classic drive-in. When the universe speaks, I listen. Or maybe it was Carousel speaking, but either way, I pulled into the diner and found a spot. My only complaint was that I didn't know if I'd have to pay out of pocket or if it would be scripted and, therefore, free. I ordered a hamburger and French fries, the cheapest thing on the menu, just in case. The food was great, but as I sat there munching on my burger, I started leafing through the pages I'd been given. This was not unusual, especially for a savvy heavy player. I recalled that Camden had, on at least 2 occasions, received file folders twice as thick as the one on the car seat beside me. These folders contained all the information my character should know going in, but it would be impractical for me to learn organically in the time Carousel wanted me to. It seemed I was playing an established character, not just some rando with a goal to survive. But what did I know? As I opened the folder, the first thing that popped out was a beautiful envelope, as classy could be. It was addressed to me, though it didn't have a stamp or anything. I set my burger down, grabbed the envelope, and opened it, watching a bunch of 80s teenagers running around the parking lot, squirting water guns at each other. The letter was quite informative. I read it 3 times over, trying to absorb as much as I could. Witherhold Manor Carousel, October 19, 1986. Dearest Mr. Riley Lawrence, how does one pen a letter to Riley Lawrence, the Riley Lawrence, documentarian of the otherworldly, chronicler of the unfathomable? I do hope this note finds you not tangled in some remote marsh or mid-interview with a spirit medium, as it seems to me such circumstances would be your natural element. My name is Egon Kirst. Perhaps you've heard it tossed around corporate circles, or perhaps not, as the supernatural intrigues me far more than boardrooms ever could. Recently, I happened upon your stirring piece on Appalachian black dogs and, dare I say, the incomparable footage you captured of that skunk ape down in Okeechobee. Exquisite work, truly. You capture the elusive with an artist's eye, as though these shadows and creatures trust you in ways they trust no other. To put it plainly, I was hooked, though my tastes do run toward the macabre, as it happens. Now, allow me to propose an invitation most peculiar. I am hosting a gathering on the evening of October 31st here at Witherhold Manor in Carousel 5 o'clock, and estate as steeped in mystery as it is in mildew. The manor has been left much as it was, rambling halls, crumbling walls, a touch of fogged-over history. It would be my utmost delight to welcome you here as our guest of honor and, dare I say, principal storyteller. I am gathering individuals with a discerning ear for the bizarre, and none could hold a candle to your chronicles, Riley, especially on the matter of werewolves. As I'm sure you're aware, Witherhold carries a certain odor of lycanthropic lore, tales murkier than the manor's dusty halls. If you're inclined, I would like you to share your findings, your theories, perhaps even your footage of the elusive half-man. You'll be handsomely compensated, of course, $3,500 for the evening, with full arrangements for travel and accommodations. While humble, they come with the peculiar promise of proximity to uncharted mysteries. And I assure you, Riley, this estate has an energy that few places possess. Do consider this, won't you? If the prospect tempts you as much as I suspect, please send your reply with my courier. The 31st approaches, and I feel the timing could not be more curious, nor the moon's light more telling. Yours in restless anticipation, Egan Curse CEO, Carousel Corporation host of Witherhold Manor. Tilda. That was my kind of setup, a mysterious invitation to an old mansion. There was something about the purity of it that I liked. What I found even more interesting was that after I read the letter, something appeared on the red wallpaper for me. They were a collection of titles in the form of mental VHS tapes, which I realized I could play on command, just as I could any of my past storylines. They were my characters' documentaries. I zoomed through them, listening occasionally. If there was something important, I would be able to research through these, but I had to believe that a 5-minute clip of a skunk ape wasn't going to help me with werewolves, especially when the skunk ape kind of just looked like a black bear. I did get good footage of the Appalachian black dogs, though. They were definitely dogs, and the surrounding narration describing the history of black dogs in folklore was riveting. But I decided not to watch the whole thing. I got the gist of it. I was a hack documentarian, piecing together a bunch of interviews with people who claimed to see things of a supernatural nature. Wonderful. I tried to put myself in the mind of such a man, and it came naturally enough. I had to remember that in this world, the supernatural was real, so I probably wasn't a crackpot. I had to avoid whatever instinct I might have to play the character as an eccentric and instead play him as a skeptic who just happens to live in a world where everything is true. It was truly the acting challenge of my lifetime. The other slips of paper in the folder were newspaper copies, like the kind you would make at a public library. Apparently, my character had been doing some research into this Egan cursed fellow. What was it with names that were so on the nose? First Geist, and now Cursed. Apparently, the audience didn't need subtlety. The articles basically painted my future dinner host as a real bastard, or at least, that was the general tone they set. Westward Business Review, July 19, 1981. Trouble brewing on Somera Coast? Speculation mounts over Cursed's overseas tactics. Reports from Somera Coast suggest that Egan Cursed, CEO of Carousel Corporation, may be engaging in ruthless tactics to secure local resources. Rumors imply that Cursed's operations are displacing communities, sparking unrest in the area. One insider claims Cursed's focus on control and expansion leaves little room for local welfare. He's got no qualms about who he pushes out, they commented. While Carousel representatives deny any wrongdoing, sources close to Somera say Cursed's approach has raised eyebrows and concerns about his corporate ethics. I read through all the articles, but I didn't see anything that jumped out at me as a clue. They had similar titles to the first one. Industrial Observer, August 2, 1976. Carousel CEO accused of overrunning local businesses in aggressive acquisition spree. Global Industry Digest, September 10, 1979. Carousel under fire. Cursed faces backlash over environmental neglect allegations. Market Watch Weekly, November 3, 1984. Cursed Carousel hit with worker protests, CEO remains unmoved by demands. After Edge, I really did not want to think about an evil corporation again, and I sincerely hoped that wouldn't be featured heavily in the storyline, too. Another article in the folder was copied from a book and featured a small blurb about the mansion I was headed toward. An anthology of historic estates and manors, published 1962. Witherhold Manor, Carousel. Built in the early 1800s, Witherhold Manor is one of Carousel's oldest structures, bearing elements of both Gothic Revival and early Federalist architecture. The manor's original owner, a minor local official whose name has since been lost, reportedly abandoned the estate after only a few years, a mystery to which no historical documentation offers any insight. Witherhold's worn stone facade, unlit corridors, and overt signs of neglect have become somewhat iconic in local memory, with a prominent iron gate that remains locked to this day. The manor's long history is marked by an unusual resistance to renovation or modern alteration. Though attempts to restore the grounds have surfaced over the years, each effort seems to stall, as if prevented by an invisible force. Local lore attributes the manor's eerie preservation to unsettled energies, haunting howls, and unseen inhabitants, though no credible evidence of paranormal activity has been recorded. Nonetheless, Witherhold Manor remains a source of fascination, enduring as both a historic landmark and an enigma to Carousel's residents. Finally, I had a flyer picked up from somewhere I didn't know about the summer season in Carousel, or at least this miniature version of Carousel. Carousel flyer, May 1, 1986. Carousel kicks off the season. Town and trails open up for summer. Carousel is officially ready to welcome back locals and visitors for another exciting summer season. With nearby state parks and nature preserves now open, outdoor enthusiasts can look forward to favorite activities like hiking, river floating, and camping. It went on for a while, just explaining all of the fun activities that could be done in this revamped version of the horror town I knew. Strangely, as I looked around, the lighting and the tone reminded me a lot of Camp Dyer. But that was it. That was the end of the freebies. Every other clue, I would have to get on my own. The first insight I managed to pick up was from a young blonde woman sitting in a parked convertible in a motel parking lot across the street. She was talking to a tall man dressed like he was ready to employ some guerrilla war tactics. It was Kimberly and Antoine, and I could see on the red wallpaper that they were on screen. We had discussed some ideas about how we would work our characters together, and they decided to go with a classic they hadn't used in a while, a romantic angle. I could almost hear what they were saying right now. "Oh my goodness, Antoine, I haven't seen you in so long, but the feelings inside still burn hot." "I feel the same way, Kimberly. If only we could get over our individual baggage and reconnect at the spooky dinner we were both invited to. See my envelope." "You have an envelope?" "I have an envelope too, see? What a coincidence. We can't get along too well this early. Let's leave the audience wanting more and leaving a little bit unsaid, my love." "Yes, my big tough hero. Please look at me with your big, brooding eyes one last time." Before they departed, Antoine gave Kimberly a very meaningful last look before walking back to his truck and driving off down the road, followed by Kimberly, now off-screen. Everything was going according to plan. I put my papers back in the passenger seat. I wanted to get out and talk to some of the locals, but time was running tight. I barely had time to eat and read, and according to my character's wristwatch, it was time to head out and follow the last leg of the journey on the map to a location I could only assume was Witherhold Manor. I had to hope that, in the same way I was given a lot of information in both film and text format, Kimberly and Antoine had had time to explore the town and talk to the locals. We would have to compare notes when we got there. I put my car in reverse and tried to pull out of my parking space. The car hop never asked me for money, for the record. Somehow, and I swear this wasn't my fault, as I started to pull out, I almost hit a group of people. I'd say they were around my age, maybe a little younger, some a little older. They came out of nowhere, and I realized that it wasn't me who did it because as I was about to curse in surprise again, I noticed I was on screen. My character was supposed to be running into these people. Or, almost running into them, rather. I scanned the crowd as they looked at me in disgust, as if I were some sort of crazed driver who had almost killed them, even though I was fairly certain it was a scripted interaction. One of them was flipping me off with both fingers. They were dressed like hikers, taking advantage of a very warm October, one last breath of summer. But there was something off. I looked them up and down, catching fleeting details that didn't quite add up. They all had real names, no placeholders or default NPC tags, and a little too much attitude for random extras. They seemed ordinary enough at first glance, but I sensed a kind of restlessness, an alertness that didn't match the casual camping attire. The guy who flipped me off was big, tall, and wild-looking, with a roughness that could have belonged to an outlaw or a vagrant. His name was Frank. No last name, no need for one, apparently. He held my gaze a little longer than necessary, like he was daring me to try something. For all intents and purposes, they looked like standard campers, but they seemed to bristle with a hostility that didn't sit right. As they made their way to the tables at the restaurant I was leaving, they kept glancing back at me, muttering and glaring, their eyes tracking my every move. I pulled out a little slower this time, and instead of saying something hard-headed or brash, I just gave them a little wave as if to say sorry, though that did very little to improve their opinion of me. I pulled out of the gravel parking lot and back onto the thin highway as I drove further up the mountain. Funny enough, I realized that was the mountain. It was the same one that Carousel Powerworks Pavilion was on, and I recognized its shape and general height. I drove down the road, looking for any other piece of information, but I found none. Perhaps the town itself wasn't a big part of the setting for this story. Only time would tell. Book 5 Chapter 67. After about 10 minutes of driving, I finally connected with a familiar road, a road that normally led to the Powerworks Pavilion. But this time, as I drove along, I saw that I was supposed to turn left onto a small road leading further uphill, one that had been washed out when we'd been here before. There was a simple sign showing the way to the manor. The other road, the one we usually traveled down, seemed to lead to a quarry instead of a space-based power station. I suspected they had shut it down a long time ago because the sign was so rotten I could barely read it. So, up the mountain, I drove. I glanced at my watch and realized I was making good time. I suspected that time itself was being toyed with, but I couldn't prove it. The further I drove, the more signs of the estate I began to see: old, crumbling walls, a well surrounded by a gazebo, wind chimes, and other decorations hanging from the trees. I began to realize that, in a way, autumn had made its first strike here at the top of the mountain, even though everywhere else, summer still had a little fight left in it. It was dreary and damp. Perfect for an abandoned manor. I drove onward until I reached a gate guarded by 3 armed men decked out in army gear. One of the men glanced down at a clipboard and walked up to my window as I arrived. "Name?" he asked as I rolled down my window. "Riley Lawrence," I said. He nodded, looking at his list. "Drive right on through, sir. Stick to the right and park in front of the big house." I nodded, and forward I went. They didn't even check my ID. What kind of security were they? The gate's presence had tricked me. I had assumed I was almost there, but I still had another mile to go. Then I saw it as I rounded a curve. At first, I noticed the large fountain in front of the house, which had probably not had running water in many, many years. But it was beautiful, featuring a sort of angel, or perhaps a naiad, dancing in the water that didn't run, playfully being chased by a wolfhound, all of it tarnished by time and neglect. I drove onward, noticing that there was a placard on the fountain that I'd need to get closer to read, but I'd have to park my car first. I saw Kimberly's convertible and Aunt Juan's truck parked and decided to find a place next to them. I got out of my car and set myself on a path back toward the fountain, intent on reading whatever inscription I had spied from the road. When I got there, I was met with a simple poem. "In twilight's rest, our darling sleeps, the chain of sorrow, love still keeps. Bound no more by moon's embrace, she finds her peace in silent grace. Beyond the bars of night and grief, her spirit soars, at last, released. In hallowed earth, where shadows lie, we leave our love, a soft goodbye." All I could say was, "Huh. That's interesting." I stared up at the woman I had at first believed to be an angel, but now saw as a beloved and indomitable spirit of a young daughter, probably taken too soon. After a quick scan to see if there was an opening to an underground vault or something, I walked back toward my car and looked at my watch again, realizing I had more time before I had to go inside. It wasn't that I didn't want to go into the spooky, old, Gothic mansion. I just didn't want to miss something out here. So, I went back to my car and opened up the trunk, and thank goodness I did. What I was met with was a milk crate, the old wooden kind, filled with tape reels in little metal canisters, each labeled with a title written on a piece of tape. I shuffled through them and immediately knew that most of them didn't matter, and I knew that because the 3 that did matter appeared in my head on the red wallpaper. The only way I could figure it was that, like all the other information I had gotten so far, this was information my character would absolutely already know, and that by checking the trunk, I had gained access to it. I let the tapes in my mind start to play, beginning with one labeled Background Info, Werewolf Soft Springs 1985. As I watched the tapes, I sorted through the rest of the trunk's contents and found a handheld camera, a Super 8 or similar, from what I could tell. As a documentarian, was I meant to film everything? The tape was of an interview done with an older woman who spoke about the lore of werewolves. I was rubbing my hands together as I watched it. I must have looked like a real fool, but this was great stuff. You have to learn the basics of how a werewolf works in the universe of the movie you're in. These werewolves had a lot of typical qualities, like hating silver. According to the woman, as she showed off what appeared to be a friendship bracelet made of silver, werewolves were particularly sensitive to the metal. Then she went on with more details, like the magical connection between wolves of a pack or that a werewolf will remember you for decades. In fact, she claimed that the same werewolf had visited her every few years since she was a little girl. Someone with my voice asked her why. That was even creepier than Carousel copying my handwriting. She said it was because it was her brother who went missing when they were children. That would have sounded kooky if someone in the real world said it. I could only imagine what it would be like to try to find the truth about something supernatural in a world where magic existed but was denied by the public at large. It would be hard to sort through what was real and what was nonsense. But if I were to make a guess based on the way the woman spoke, she really was being visited by her werewolf brother. She went on to list a few other details like the curse being spread by saliva. And she said something peculiar to wrap up the short interview: all werewolves are in love. That's why they howl at the moon. That was a new one for me. That was the whole tape, and while I wanted to watch the others, my time ran out. I took a look up at the manor and quickly walked toward the front door. It opened before I even had a chance to knock on the old, rusted knocker, which was just a round metal loop inside the mouth of a wolf, appropriately enough. Mr. Lawrence, a tall, olive-skinned man, said to me with a polite smile while I still held my hand in the air, reaching for the knocker like an idiot. On the red wallpaper, his name was Duval, Mr. Duval. "Hello, I got an invitation to be here tonight," I said, holding up my envelope. "You did, Mr. Lawrence, and I am so pleased that you have arrived," he said. He didn't stick out his hand for me to shake. His hands were firmly at his sides as he bowed in greeting. He was an old-fashioned butler. As I walked past him to get inside, I started to wonder if perhaps there was going to be a murder and if he was the one who did it. "The other guests are in the gentleman's parlor," he said. "I must make further arrangements for tonight's dinner if you'll excuse me. Oh, and I must ask that you never film Mr. Kirst. I understand that you are a documentarian, but he is off limits. Perhaps you should wait until tomorrow to begin." I was still holding the camera from the trunk of my car. I suppose the dinner wasn't on the record. I wasn't heartbroken. I nodded and smiled as if to release him from whatever bounds of servitude a butler signed on for. I took a look around the manor, just taking things in. My first observation was that there was no electricity. The place was wired, but for whatever reason, the electric lights, antique and beautiful, though covered in dust and cobwebs, were not on. Lanterns were placed around the entrance area. Was that called a foyer or a lobby? I couldn't remember, but it was a grand, large area that would have been quite beautiful if not for 100 years without maid service. Large bookcases were placed here and there with books that appeared to be authentic from the time period rotting right on the shelves. They had not done much to clean up around the place except sweep paths between the rooms. This was going to be a real, authentic glamping experience. There were 3 rooms leading from the entryway, and I decided to pick one at random. By luck, I found the gentleman's parlor, where 3 guests were already there, looking awkwardly at me as I entered the room. We were on screen. "Hello," I said, trying to pretend my character had people skills. "Riley Lawrence." The first person to greet me was a Dr. Andrew Hughes, who crossed the room with grace and authority, extending his hand for me to shake. "If you have any doubts about your choice to come this evening," he said, "you should know that the whiskey is almost as old as the house, and smooth as the Carousel River." "That's good," I said, not quite matching Andrew's tone. "Need a little booze to exchange our ghost stories, don't we?" "I don't know if we'll need it, But we definitely have it, Kimberly Madison said from across the room. She and Aunt One were standing next to each other awkwardly as if they were choosing not to speak so they could start their on-screen relationship slowly. So, does anyone know what the deal is? Are we really here just to talk about werewolves? I asked. That's all anyone wants to talk about with me, Kimberly said. Why should the richest man in the world be any different? I shrugged my shoulders. We were on screen, so I couldn't ask questions like, where's Lila or Michael? Or, maybe more importantly, what exactly is the countdown that we were supposed to be racing against? Instead of talking about what we were doing there as players, we started feeding lines to Carousel that it might use to help set up the werewolf situation. So, can you believe we're actually in the Witherhold Manor? I said. I mean, you trace werewolf lore, no matter how far back you go, it comes through here. You'd almost think that werewolves died off before the 1800s and then popped up again in little old Carousel out of nowhere. That was something the old lady had told me in the film I watched, but now I could repeat it and sound smart and informed. I have little interest in lore or superstition, Andrew said. Kirst told me he had an intact claw from a werewolf. I may be a sucker for it, but I packed the bag immediately. Physical evidence is hard to come by, I said, just piecing things together. That's why I always like to capture things on film. I figure the more people learn about the dangers we all know about, the better. People don't want to know about the dangers we know about, Ant-Man said. You could show it to them, and they'd choose not to believe it. People want to feel safe, and you can't feel safe once you know werewolves exist, once you know that your life is a hunt, and you're either the hunter or the prey, and you won't know till the end. That was a very intense choice for Ant-One to go with. I liked it. Carousel must have given him a pretty heavy backstory. We spoke some more, mostly with one-liners like the ones we had done already. It wasn't until Kimberly got one in that the story started to move forward again. She said, I've been running from werewolves since I was a teenager. Never thought I would be back here, but you can't run from your problems forever. It'll be nice to tell my story to people that believe me for a change. And that was it. Duval, the butler, opened the door and asked us to re-enter the entryway. When we did, we found Michael standing next to a man named Hawk Kipling. Hawk had a plot armor of 30 and a bunch of tropes that I couldn't see. Apparently, it was the situation where Paragon had gotten scaled down to my level for the storyline. To describe Hawk, I could say that I knew immediately he was the monster hunter Paragon, and that wasn't just because I had read about him in the Atlas. He had a giant knife on one hip and a gun on the other. He wore what was probably the coolest-looking fanny pack I had ever seen, which I could only imagine was filled with monster hunting gear. He wore tough boots, jeans, and a large jacket, the kind ranchers used to wear. To top it all off, he had, well, it wasn't a cowboy hat, but it was definitely in the family of cowboy hats. I couldn't tell what era his character was supposed to be from, but I could tell from the look on his face that he had experienced a lot of violence and action and was ready for more. Having an advanced archetype Paragon in the story was very useful information because it told us that his advanced archetype was being used to modify the story, turning this, whatever it was, into a hunt. I had experience with that because Arthur had done the same thing with the grotesques. We had a fight ahead of us, but I had to know that already, because, werewolves, duh. Mr. Kirst will be with you shortly, the butler said as he left us in the entryway. We were on screen, so again, no talking, no comparing notes out of character. But we could still compare notes in character. I thought he had gathered some people that wanted to talk to us, I said. Where are the guests? This is supposed to be a speaking engagement or something. He didn't tell me anything about a speaking engagement, Ant-Man said. He was looking for advice on killing werewolves. We looked at each other, confused. What did he tell you this was? I asked Kimberly. Same as you, she said. We were supposed to talk to some guests of his. Well, maybe we should ask for half of our pay up front, I said. At least Andrew laughed at my joke as he went to greet Michael, whose character he had not been introduced to yet. Michael shook his hand, playing the strong, silent type from what I could tell. Even as Andrew introduced himself, Michael simply said hello and didn't respond further. Before we could make much small talk, however, the man of the hour decided to make an entrance. At first, I heard clapping from above us, upstairs, and then I saw him appear at the top of the stairs and begin to walk downward, slowly, deliberately. I have before me some of the greatest minds in paranormal investigation that the world has ever known. I'm just getting goosebumps at the thought of it, he said. It occurred to me that monster hunters of all stripes are rather lonely creatures, aren't they? Always choosing to travel alone, to live alone, to pursue the darkness alone. So, I thought to myself, how much could we get done if I just gathered together some of the best paranormal minds and really set them to task discussing their occupation? I was very selective in my choice for this inaugural dinner. Ant Stone, he said, probably the most prolific hunter of evil creatures known to man. I spoke to a sheriff's deputy who swore up and down that Mr. Stone saved him from a vampire infestation that nearly killed an entire town. He left a pause in his speech as he continued working down the stairs. Antoine didn't respond, and I didn't think he was meant to. The pause was there so we could all stare at Antoine and get a good look at the man who could do such a thing. And, of course, Riley Lawrence. In a world where dangers see fit to stay hidden, this man shines a light on them. Your work is incredibly important, and of course, I would love to consider myself a patron. He reached the bottom of the stairs and came to shake my hand. That's when I got a really good look at him, and frankly, I just didn't get it. I had pictured something in my mind when I thought about the idea of an eccentric billionaire, but what stood before me was a man of means but also a man of practicality. He was not dressed up in a tux or anything like that. Instead, he wore a simple sports coat and a button-up shirt with no tie, unbuttoned enough that his chest hair was visible. He didn't look like the soft-handed fool who would throw his money at people chasing monsters in the dark for his own entertainment, and yet, when he spoke, that's exactly what he was, a huge fan. He wore a short mustache and a humble hairstyle. While I was sure his clothes were high quality, they did not look flashy. He just looked like a normal guy, or perhaps as normal as a wealthy CEO could look. He looked friendly. The only thing about him that gave me pause was that his plot armor was the same as mine, despite him being an NPC. However, unlike Huck Kipling, he did not appear to be a paragon. Dr. Andrew Hughes, he said after shaking mine and then Antoine's hand. I can only imagine the frustration of a man of science trying to understand a creature whose entire existence seems to fade from the fabric of reality whenever the sun rises. Well, it certainly hasn't done much for my career as a medical doctor, Andrew said. Oh, I could only imagine. Tell me, how did you first become aware of the existence of werewolves? No, wait, tell me that over dinner. Remind me about it later. I'm sure that you have many wonderful stories. He shook Andrew's hand and then went to shake Huck Kipling's, with nothing but the phrase, and Mr. Kipling here needs no introduction, I'm sure, not in this room. The world's greatest monster hunter. The greatest living one, at least, Huck said, his voice deep but playful. Mr. Brooks, he said, turning to Michael, thank you and thank your people. I would never want to investigate the werewolf curse of Carousel without one of Carousel's own here. I am sure that the oral histories of your people and the knowledge passed down will make this conversation far more productive. He didn't shake Michael's hand. He acted as if it would have been rude to do so. Michael was Native American, but I guessed in this story he was Native Carouselian. I wasn't sure, so I decided not to focus on it. And last but not least, the girl who lived, he said, turning to Kimberly. I read your account of that harrowing event, and I could hardly take a breath during it, it was that compelling. Now, I looked at the police records, and they're claiming that your friends all died of hypothermia or some similar nonsense and then were scavenged upon by wild animals, which would explain all the claw marks. But you and I know the truth, and the rest of us do, too. And maybe, after tonight's dinner, we can find a way to make sure that everyone knows the truth. Kimberly was hit by the intensity of Mr. Kirst's comments as if a gale of wind had just struck her. She reacted at first with surprise at how blunt he was being, but then with a polite smile, and she said, "I'd like that." "Well, if that is everything," Mr. Kirst said, "I suppose all that's left to do is eat and discuss. As you may have guessed, I am the special person you have been brought here to speak to, and I intend to learn as much as I can." Book 5 Chapter 68 Mr. Kirst led us to a small dining room with a single window. "You'll have to forgive me. The formal dining room is damaged beyond repair," he said. The informal dining room we were in was probably the nicest room in the house. There were very few signs of 100 years without affection. In fact, it only looked like it had been abandoned for less than 50 years. It was practically in mint condition. If we had to sleep in the manor for the storyline, this would be the room to do it in. There was a large round wooden table with place settings ready to go and little named cards for each of us, showing us where to sit. I chose a round table because I want this to be a conversation. "I don't want you to try to defer to me just because I'm your host," Mr. Kirst said. "And I hope you'll notice that the silverware is genuine silver. There could be nothing less for a conversation like the one we're about to have." As we walked in, we were still on screen, but Kimberly managed to discreetly elbow me and point to the painting on the wall of the dining room. It wasn't quite the painting we had brought. It wasn't The Omen. It was a larger version of The Omen. Where the one we had purchased at the flea market only showed the woman's head and enough of her torso to display her necklace, this one was a full-body portrait of her standing next to a window with a beautiful watery vista. Still, the silver necklace was probably the most detailed and beautiful part of the painting. It had no inscription or title that I could see, and when I asked Mr. Kirst about it, he simply said, "Oh, yes, that came with the house." You'd be shocked to know that the looters actually left some good stuff. Perhaps the best home defense is a reputation for being haunted. I had to give it to him. Mr. Kirst was funny, always ready with a quip. Throughout much of the dinner, he showed himself to be a very inquisitive and knowledgeable man who could keep a conversation flowing masterfully. He asked us about our experiences, and we told him to the best of our ability. Sometimes we were on screen, sometimes off-screen, as Carousel got its footage of the conversation and the charismatic, strange man who had brought us there. "So, in all of your travels, you've never found a cure?" Mr. Kirst asked with childlike intensity. "Not one potion, not one spell?" "The cure is silver," Ant-Man said. "Preferably in the heart." "But that kills the werewolf," Mr. Kirst replied. "I can see why you're not the doctor at the table." "Like I said, it's the cure," Antoine responded. "Oh, I see. So you would never make an attempt to return an afflicted back to their human form? You've never even considered it?" Andrew asked, wine glass in hand. "Never had the time," Ant-Man said. "Of course, I don't study them in the lab. I'm usually running after them in the woods." That got a laugh. "Of course, I know the legends," Antoine continued. "To revert the werewolf to its human form permanently, you have to kill the wolf who turned them, but I don't believe it. It can be hard to sort the chaff from the wheat when it comes to supernatural lore." "No," Hawk Kipling said. "Not the werewolf that turned them. You have to kill the pack leader. All werewolves are bound to their pack leader, and if you kill their pack leader before the curse has taken hold, they will be freed from it." I didn't know that. None of my videos had told me. "It didn't take us long to get away from the scientific, did it?" Mr. Kirst asked Andrew with a laugh. "It rarely does," Andrew responded. "Unfortunately, this space is dominated by folklore and very little study." Kirst laughed. "To the contrary. Lycanthropy used to be studied with some rigor, back before the advent of modern medicine." "There's probably a reason for that," Andrew said. "And what is that?" I asked. "If you go looking for a magical curse and find only a dreadful disease, you probably lose interest," Andrew said with a chuckle. "It is interesting you say that," Kirst said. "I cannot help but feel the reverse may be true." Andrew took a short sip from his drink and said, "You believe the werewolf curse is really that, a curse?" Kirst did not answer at first, but for a moment,
I saw a glint in his eye that I could not place. He wasn't the flamboyant businessman for a moment. He was something else. I have made my fortune by assuming that men's pride is folly, Curse said. The very suggestion that this force of nature could be dissected and understood reads as pure hubris. No offense to you, Dr. Hughes. I admire the dogged pursuit of truth. This is a force we do not understand, and I believe we can count on that to remain the case. There was a moment of silence at that statement. I couldn't help but wonder what it was we had gotten into. We were eating some kind of roast with carrots that tasted like honey while discussing werewolves at length. The conversation was quite riveting, actually, because everyone had been given different bits of lore, and we were all discussing them. As soon as we started, I had my tapes playing in the background of my mind, casually listening over and over. They were similar to the first tape, just interviews with folks who had lived long enough to have seen some things and heard some things, nothing hard-hitting. Now, what say your people? Mr. Curse asked, looking at Michael. We say the best cure is to never get bit, to never kiss strange women around the campfire, and to always wear silver around your neck, Michael said, showing a necklace he wore with an informed lump of silver dangling from the end. That's as close to a cure as you're going to get unless you're chasing fairy dust. What is it with silver? Mr. Curse asked, taking a large drink from his wine glass. Why silver? Why does it have some interaction with werewolves? Does anyone have any idea? Silver does have antimicrobial qualities, Andrew offered. Perhaps the werewolf virus is particularly weak to its presence. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find an intact tissue sample from a werewolf. The damn things keep turning back into human samples, don't they? Hawk asked. As you say, Andrew answered. I'm sure that you didn't have the presence of mind to do tests on that werewolf who shifted while you were operating on them like you were telling us about. Mr. Curse asked. Andrew had told a story of performing surgery on a car accident victim who went wolf in the hospital. I didn't, I confess, Andrew said. I was afraid for my life and wondering how I was going to get my scalpel back after the beast's flesh regrew around it. Werewolves in this story could be drawn out of their human forms when injured. More laughter. It was a genuinely good time. Well, I only asked if you knew a way to revert a werewolf to its human form permanently because I know that Christian Stone, your brother, Antoine, was a hunter who got bitten on one of his hunts, correct? Mr. Curse asked. Silence for a moment. That was the risk we signed on for. Our dad always told us that you should only want to be alive or dead, nothing in between, Antoine said. I don't know where people got off calling werewolves undead, but that was often a category they were put into. But you didn't even think for one moment about curing him? Kimberly asked. By the time I knew he needed curing, it was too late to even think about it, Antoine said. What's done is done. This was a great acting job from Antoine. A sad recollection, Mr. Curse said, a sad sentiment. More than a few at this table know the same. Miss Madison, would you care to tell us your tale again? I would like to hear it again. Kimberly, who had barely touched her food, placed her fork down beside her plate. She had told us this story already, but we were off screen. I remember everything, she said, but nowadays, I don't really tell the whole story. When people think that you lost your mind in grief, they are okay with tolerating a simple, vague story, they never want details. I was camping with my friends at an abandoned summer camp we had gone to years earlier. A reunion, of sorts. We got attacked in the night, and my friends didn't make it. I did, but I had help, she said. Those monsters were just tearing the place apart because they could. There's no way I could have survived. I wish I had more to tell you than that, but truthfully, that's exactly what happened. It was a fun getaway in the woods, and then suddenly, people were just killed, and those monsters were all around. I kept myself locked away in one of the lodges. Then I heard yelping. When morning came, I went outside to see my friends, who had been mauled, and some naked people with silver bullet holes and stuffed bellies. And I found that one getting ready to go hunt down the ones that got away. I've been looking for people with stories like mine ever since. She looked up at Antoine, and they shared a moment, locking eyes. Antoine didn't say anything, but it should have been clear to anyone in the audience that they had a romantic history if it wasn't already. "Well, that is an amazing story," Mr. Curse said. "Might I throw something by you, a rumor I heard about the cure for the werewolf curse?" He paused as if we were going to say no. "See, what I've always heard in all of my studies, my quite extensive studies as of late, was that the only way to reverse the curse is to kill the pack leader before the very next full moon. That's when the curse sets in, the next full moon," he said, looking at Hawk as if completing the lore Hawk had presented. "In fact, I have something in my possession that I would love to show you. We could call it an experiment, but I like to think of it as a desperate last attempt. I'll be right back." And so he got up from the table and left the small dining room. And we were left to wait on screen. The longer we waited, the more concerned I became. Were we supposed to be talking? Perhaps, but the plot cycle was moving forward, however slowly, which meant that we were just supposed to stay there and wait. But what were we waiting for? "Oh my God," Kimberly said. Somehow, she was the first to notice. She pointed up at the vents at the top of the room. A thin white gas snaked down from them. No sooner did we see it than we started to cough and feel its effects. It fried my brain almost immediately. I was useless. We began panicking, screaming, asking what was going on. Our first thought was to try to leave the room, but when we went to the door, we found it locked and barred from the other side. Antoine, with all his might, began beating on the door while Michael went to the window nearby. He found that while he could smash it, it was shuttered and, therefore, not usable for escape. Perhaps with enough time, we could have gotten out. We had a lot of metal in that room, after all. But we didn't have time because the smoke was making us drowsy. In fact, by the time I felt I had my wits together, it was too late. I felt myself getting sleepy, and the unconscious light on the red wallpaper started to light up. Adrenaline and fear kept me awake long enough to realize that it could be that simple, that this could be the end. Had we just gotten postered? "Why is he doing this?" Antoine said. "Why poison us?" "It's not poison," I said. "It's knockout gas." But I didn't get to say much more than that because my grit was lower than some of the others in the room, and I soon found myself slinking to the floor. I was out and at the mercy of Egon Cursed. Tobe continued. "Thanks for listening.